I've helped a lot of people get jobs, and I don't get paid for this stuff for a lot of it. And you know, being in recruiting, while I fell into it out of college, it has become a very strong passion of mine because I can not only help companies grow with my talent of bringing in people, I can also help people get into jobs that they may not have thought they could get into. I've had a few people get 30, 40, 50% increases in their compensation just by changing jobs. And, while I don't get thank you cards for every person I place, it makes me feel good that, I've probably helped hire well over a couple thousand people in my career.
Hello, and welcome to episode 234 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I am your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts, along with strategies for success. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review or a rating. That would mean a lot to me and help others find the show. Tell a friend about the podcast and help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. Today's guest is Justin Dixon, founder of Hire Tomorrow, a recruiting firm based in Austin, Texas. With more than 18 years of experience in recruiting, Justin has worked across the spectrum from agencies to fast-paced startups to Fortune 500 companies. In January 2020, he took the leap into entrepreneurship, launching his recruiting business just as the world was about to change. Despite the challenges of the pandemic, Justin continues to grow his company by helping private equity firms and startups find the right talent to scale their teams. Justin is also passionate about investing in both people and businesses. On top of this recruiting expertise, Justin is a real estate and angel investor and the host of his own Growth Capital podcast, where he dives deep into the journeys of entrepreneurs, investors, and CEOs. All right. Well, welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, Justin. Justin, it's great to have you on today.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to be here. Excited to have a good chat.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the work you do in your podcast, but tell us about yourself and your journey to the work that you're doing now.
So I've been in recruiting my entire career. I kind of fell into it right out of college back in 2006. I didn't really know that recruiting was a career path. Like that was not something that you go to school for. I was looking for a job and found it and kind of stuck with it. I spent over 18 years in recruiting in some form or fashion. I have worked in an agency. I've worked in startup as their first recruiter. I've worked in big Fortune 500 companies. And then back in January of 2020, I thought it was a bright idea to quit a very stable corporate job as head of recruitment for a wealth management firm in Philadelphia to start my own recruiting business right as COVID was starting. So, needless to say, that was not the ideal scenario or ideal time to start a recruiting business, but I'm still around. I'm still here, which is great. And so I've been doing that for a little over five years. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. What were all the factors? Like, how did you decide to go into business for yourself? And did you have fears around that, or what were all the factors?
Yeah, well, definitely had fears because I'm very much a risk averse person, and my wife is very similar. So it took us a few years to really get the courage and the timing and all that stuff right. But the impetus was really I read a book called Rich Dad Poor Dad, and it was a little bit of a light bulb moment in my life and in my wife's life. So I was working at Comcast at the time as a recruiter there, and I was living in Philadelphia, and I was walking to work, and I read this book, and I was like, holy cow, like there is, because I grew up in a very small town, and I had the same kind of financial education that most of the world has, and that is get a good job, invest in your 401k, and hope you've got enough in retirement when you hit 65, and hopefully the market hasn't crashed the year before you want to retire, and hopefully you have enough to retire. And so I was on that path. I was investing and maxing out my 401k and doing all the things that I thought were the only way to kind of live or invest. And then this book kind of opened my eyes to being an entrepreneur and investing in yourself and in businesses and in real estate. And so I literally was walking to work and I finished the book and I was like, holy cow, like my brain shifted and I was like, I need to figure this out. And I was married at the time. And so I was a little nervous because I had a brain shift, but my wife and I were, on the same path. And I said, hey, just read this book. and tell me what you think. And she luckily had the same light bulb, was like, we need to shift our path at the moment. And it took us, that was probably 2018. And it took us, for two or 3 years to really kind of get things together. And in 2018, I graduated, I finished my MBA. I left Comcast. I went to work for this wealth management firm called Glen Mead. And I really had no intention of quitting that job a year later. But my wife and I were putting things together and putting things in place, both financially to set ourselves up financially to have a cushion, but also mentally to prepare for, potentially a worst case scenario if it fails, right? And so that year we bought a duplex in Pittsburgh. So we had some passive income coming from that. We owned a condo in Philadelphia. We ended up moving out to the suburbs, downgrading our lives, downgrading our expenses at the time when all of our friends are increasing their expenses and having kids and buying houses, and we were doing the exact opposite, all for the goal of giving us enough runway, or giving me enough runway to quit a job, start a business, and give myself enough runway to give it a good go, and hopefully it would be successful. So it was a process to go from, I think I want to change how I'm investing my time and not trade my time for money, which is what you do in a job. And I wanted to go start a business and try to make a different path in the world. And so that's what we did.
Yeah. I also thought Rich Dad Poor Dad was great. You kind of talked about what it was against, but could you just in a nutshell, what's the philosophy behind it?
So in a nutshell, and I haven't read it for a while, so I don't take this as like a book
Yeah,
review or
right.
anything like
Right,
that.
right, right.
But essentially it talks a lot about, there's two paths. You got the rich dad and the poor dad. And the poor dad is kind of the traditional American training on what to invest both your time and money into. And those things are: get a good job, work for 30, 40 years. Hopefully, maybe if you got a pension, that's great, but those obviously are going away for the most part. And so you've got to invest in a 401k, and then hopefully that develops enough so that you can live off of that money for the rest of your life. And the rich dad was like, I'm going to take the money that I earn in a job, and I'm going to buy real estate, which is, an investment property, which hopefully is going to generate income, so that your passive income theoretically will grow to the extent that it outpaces or at least matches your earned income, which then you hit the magical financial freedom number where you effectively don't have to work or earn an income to essentially be able to fund your life. And so there's a lot more nuances to that, and buying businesses and all that fun stuff. But that's the thing that really resonated with me, was this whole notion of passive income. And first of all, investing in real estate is not always passive. Honest about
Yeah,
that.
right,
There's a
right.
lot of active stuff that goes into it, but there are ways to be a passive investor. And I spent about 2.5 years being a very active investor in multifamily real estate, and now I've shifted back to being much more passive, where I find people that are being active investors and finding properties, and I invest my capital with them, which makes it very passive because I don't have to manage the property. I don't have to deal with anything. I just bet on the horse essentially, and hopefully that they execute their business plan well enough that it generates income, and I don't have to worry about anything. I don't have to clean toilets or deal with tenants and all that fun stuff.
Right,
So
right.
there's nuances, but that's kind of what I took away from it, was this notion of passive income and developing enough of that to outpace my earned income, so that it frees me up to still work if I want to, or take a month off or a year off, and it doesn't impact how I live, essentially.
Yeah, awesome. So we're going to get into more of the work you're doing and your podcast, but first, you are a fellow introvert. So
Yeah.
what's a strength? What does introversion mean to you? And what's a strength that you have because you're an introvert?
It's interesting to like think about being an introvert being versus being an extrovert, because I can be a little bit of a chameleon. I can force myself to go into social situations and not come across as an introvert, but I think about the differences in energy. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is what things that I'm doing or who I'm hanging out with give me energy or take away my energy. And I think being an introvert or even being an extrovert, knowing those things is a superpower, because then Like I went to a conference in Vegas that had over 3,000 attendees. It was, and I had, and you were booked meetings ahead of time, and it's just rapid fire for 2 days. And I knew that after that conference, I would need to take at least 2 days to recuperate. Extroverts would go to that and they would get a ton of energy from that because that's their environment. And so I think over the years, I think one of the things that I've learned is really to set my calendar up because being a business owner, I can't just sit behind a computer and, recruit all day. I need to go out and generate business. I need to go out and network. And so, I kind of almost like invest my time knowing that I'm going to need to regenerate that energy at some point down the road. And so just knowing those things that give you energy and take away your energy has really helped me to still do the things that I need to do to generate business, but also it allows me to know and even with my wife, like, hey, I'm going to this event. I know I'm going to need to like decompress. And so that's really really powerful to know the different things that give and take energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a lot of it. But also, I always talk about, beyond the energy, as introverts, we need time. We definitely want to spend time with our friends and family. We need to collaborate. We like to collaborate with others, but we need some time. But we also need some time to think and focus. How important is it for you as an introvert to find that time to be strategic, to think about, focus on some projects and work?
Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely I've read the Deep Work book, Cal Newport, and that whole philosophy of like going into the woods for 3 months and just thinking it is scary because like as an entrepreneur, like you have to continue to do the things. And so one thing that I've done kind of to do that in micro doses is to essentially set my calendar up because I do a lot of kind of strategic, kind of high thinking tasks in the morning. And
Yeah.
so, because I know by the end of the day, my energy levels are going to be dropping and I need to do more mundane tasks in the afternoon that don't really take a lot of energy and focus. And so I think structuring my days and weeks to carve out the time necessary to just think about, okay, I'm trying to go after this type of client, or I'm going to go to this conference. How do I need to set myself up for that? And so really adjusting my schedule to tap into the times of the day and the days of the week that I know, okay, this is a heavy focus, so I need to set aside 2 or 3 hours to focus on this one thing versus, just letting my calendar kind of rule my time. You need to own your time. Even if you're an employee or an entrepreneur, either you rule your calendar or your calendar rules you.
Yeah, and that's I found that too as an introvert that you need to have that time to think. You need to have time to focus. You need to plug in recharge. If you do have an all-day event at a conference, you can prepare for it, which is helpful. But afterward, you need to put in that downtime somewhere, and
Yeah.
so the calendar is really key for all of this. And it's not just about recharging, it's also about getting some things done and using your gifts of deep thinking to do that.
Yeah, I agree.
And also on this show, we bust myths. Is there an introvert myth that you want to bust today?
Well, I would say that I think because I started my career in a very sales kind of or kind of area, you kind of have to force yourself to be that mold, right? Because I was in a sales organization and, it was a very boiler room-esque, I'm dating myself a little bit here, but a little bit of a boiler room-esque kind of environment where, you know, I was hanging out with a lot of extroverts that were, just crushing Red Bulls and, doing sales calls and stuff. And so, I was putting myself and kind of almost trying to match their energy and their effort. And so I think one of the myths is like you can't brute force this. You're going to have some type of a crash at some point. So if you're an introvert, I don't think that being in a sales environment is not for you because I was successful and I know a lot of people, there's a lot of different ways to be successful in that type of environment. It's just, not trying to brute force it because that doesn't always work. It might work in the short term, but definitely, you're going to pay for it down the road, I think.
Yeah, and I often talk about that for the most part, there's not jobs that are specific for introverts or extroverts. Just as an introverted salesperson, you might go about things differently, which is absolutely fine. I was just talking with somebody on his podcast, and you know, probably a lot of programmers are introverted, but there could be extroverted programmers too. And he was talking about an extroverted program that works for him, and it's just there's generally not particular jobs. It's just you might go about your job differently. You might build relationships differently, and it's all good. Being true to yourself, you're going to get much farther than trying to be something you're not.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure.
All right, so you're a fellow podcaster. Tell us about the Growth Capital podcast.
Yeah, so because of a lot of the clients that I work with in my recruiting business are tied into the private equity, M&A, startup-y world, I was like, why don't I create a podcast where startup entrepreneurs can come on and we can have a conversation about their journey from going from maybe an employee to a founder and then, having essentially private equity and venture capital people on to talk about, okay, well, what type of investments do they look for and what type of founders do they like to see and talk to and all that stuff. So I'm kind of creating a little bit of this ecosystem of, startup founders, investors, whether they're venture capital. I've had a few angel investors on, and then, mid-market CEOs that have kind of either founded a business that has been successful or they've kind of come in after a founder has taken it to the point where they can and they go, okay, cool, I'm going to take it to the next level. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic to have all three kind of sides of a transaction in the life cycle of a business to learn about their journeys and their expertises and what kind of made them successful in their kind of area of that kind of three-pronged stool, if you will. So I'm not super deep into it. I think I'm hitting 30. I think my 35th episode is going to launch next week. So, it's still an infant, but it's a lot of fun and I interview people every day for my job. So this is just an interview where I record it and share it with the world. So it's a little bit interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you know, it's another myth is, introverts, that's not, you can't be a podcaster, that's an extrovert thing, which is absolutely not true. We have a lot to say, and it's a really good way to share our ideas, have a great one-on-one conversation like we're having, but share it with everybody.
Well, I think you and we were talking about this kind of before we recorded. I keep my interviews very conversational, and I don't really send out a lot of prep because one, I don't want people to have canned responses for certain things, but I think it probably you sent out a list of kind of suggested topics or potential questions that, we were going to talk about, which I think is really helpful because while I didn't create responses for all of them, it gives me a little bit of an idea of where the conversation can go. And also, if my guest is an introvert, they may want to be more prepared, right? And so I'm going to take some kind of I'm going to steal that learning from you and start to craft some more specific questions for my guests, or at least topics that we will probably cover, so that an introvert may prepare for those questions and an extrovert probably won't even look at the email. So it'll be
Yeah, yeah.
it'll work for everybody essentially.
Yeah, and I mean, it's, I always tell people like yourself, it's not a script, I'm not just looking at my script and asking you the next question, but it's a framework, and
Yeah.
we do better with preparation. And Justin, it's like often we need to think before we speak, but when we're talking about our expertise, in my case, introversion, I'm I could do this interview like if you were interviewing me, I could do the interview without any preparation if you were asking me about introversion, and same with your expertise.
Yeah, and I think one thing to call out because I've led people, I've been a manager of people, and one of the things that's really important is to know the people on your team and how they need to be treated or how they think, right? Because, I can go into a conference room and sit down and we could have a topic and I can lean into a talk as I or think as I talk kind of motion where you're really just kind of spitballing and sometimes I can be very successful in that. But I know that and I was leading some people earlier in my career and I was like, okay, well, I know at least one person on my team is very much a think and then come back, or at least
Yeah,
they want to prepare before the meeting so that they can be prepared to talk because we've all been in those meetings where there's one person that just always has to say something, even if it's not very insightful, right? They just feel obligated to like talk because they're probably the most extroverted person in the room. But then there's always that one or two people that never say anything, but that doesn't mean that they don't have good ideas or bright ideas. They just need the time to think about what the topic is or what the question is and then come back with a more thoughtful response. So I didn't learn that right away in my leadership career, but once at Comcast we did an assessment called Insights Discovery, and it kind of gives you kind of your different colors and what color you are and all that stuff. And once we started to do that, you could tell who the extroverts were, and then you knew how to communicate to them. They just want the bullets, right? They just want give me the bullets and get out of my way. Versus somebody else, they may want the backstory, right? They may want all information so they can then kind of think about it and provide a response. So that's one thing that I learned, kind of midway through my managerial career. It's really helped to kind of make sure that everybody on the team feels like their opinions and thoughts are being heard.
Yeah, that's brilliant and so important, especially as a leader. And and that's something. It's like generally as introverts we think and then we speak. And sometimes you're right. Sometimes we can get into the rapid fire and we do great. But often we need to think, and as a leader, it's the meeting leader, the meeting facilitator. It's important to provide an agenda for those people that want to gather information. Because I'm definitely somebody that wants to know as much as I can about something. So, I can look at the agenda ahead of time. And again, it comes back to managing your week and looking ahead like, okay, I need to know more about this. Here's some points I want to make. Here's some questions I want to ask. And I will say this. I I think as a leader, you need to be prepared to let people respond after, but it's not the ideal to me. If you're an introvert, you should be participating in that meeting as much as possible, by preparing, speaking early, and making it known that you have some valuable things to say and in building that reputation that you have some valuable things to say. That can take some time, but just understanding that dynamic makes all the difference because yeah, some people are going to think out loud and some people are going to, take their time, share what they think is most important. Neither way is right or wrong. They're just different. And when we don't understand that dynamic, we're not going to be as successful as teams.
Yeah. Well, and also I've been in meetings a ton where I have a question and or I have an answer to a question and I never say it, but then somebody else says it or asks that question and I'm like, well, because you may think it's a dumb question, right? And I will say that, a lot of times when I'm sitting in meetings, I'm like, I have a question about something and maybe it's a stupid question. I don't want to look stupid, right? And so you don't ask it, but then somebody else does. And then like, oh, that's a great question. Or like, it
Yeah.
creates another kind of tangent on the question. I'm like, damn it, I should have said something, right? And so, so I just wish I would have like trusted my gut back in the day. The older I get, the less I care. And so I ask dumb questions and I'm okay with that. Or I just ask questions. And so I think if you're an introvert and you're listening to this and if that resonates with you, it's like just try it once. Like if you and maybe it'll kind of help you to kind of become a little bit more conversational or at least it'll give you the idea to ask questions that pop into your brain because there are probably other people are thinking the same question.
Yeah. So when I started my podcast, I definitely wanted to give a voice to the strengths of introverts, bust, miss, that kind of thing. But I've also found just some powerful benefits. Like it's been such a great networking tool. I've met so many great people from it. Also it can be a great marketing tool, whether you're the host or you're the guest. What benefits have you found from podcasting, and maybe did any of them surprise you?
Well, one, I don't like creating content. So it is a very easy way to have content that is up to date, real, video, audio. You can snip it and do whatever you want to do with it. So I've got a marketing consultant that loves the fact that I've got a podcast because it allows her to create a bunch of content versus me having to force myself to record those awkward videos of just you standing here and saying, this is the five things you should be thinking about when you're writing a resume. It's like that's so anyway, so it's for me, it's a very easy way to create content. The content lives on forever. And so, if you post it all over, LinkedIn and, Spotify and YouTube, it's there. And so people can find it years down the road. I've had people I had a podcast 2 years ago about commercial real estate, and I've had people still commenting on things that I've done 2 years ago that haven't touched in a long time. So I like that too. I think, because I'm an introvert, I don't love the sales side of being an entrepreneur. And so it allows me to have a soft outreach to a potential somebody that could be a client down the road, right? Without being like, hey, I want to help you recruit your next executive. I go, hey, I want to have you on my podcast to talk about, what you like, what you don't like, what your career journey is, et cetera. And they get to know me a little bit more. I get to know them, and it could be a little bit of an easy way to generate business. And also, you probably experience this. You get to learn that everybody's story is different, right? Like, I mean, I've talked to, I don't know, a dozen or two startup founders, and everybody's got a really unique, different path. And to your point earlier, like there's no one right way or one way to do this. So there's a ton of benefits. And with the way that technology and AI is getting up to speed, the whole editing and creation of the content is so much easier now. It's made my team's life a lot easier because they can just upload it into a bot thing and it'll spit out shorts and all these other pieces of content. So it's made the actual production a lot better and a lot easier, which is nice.
Yeah, very cool. And we've been talking about, you founded Hire Tomorrow and you brought in your recruiting experience to then form your own company. What was it from your past experience that helped you then lead a company?
Yeah, I would say a lot of skilled practitioners, regardless of what the skill set is, think that, well, I'm a good recruiter, I'm a good, plumber or roofer, I should go start a plumbing or roofing or recruiting business. And so what the skill set of being a recruiter does not necessarily mean you are a going to be a successful leader of a business, right? Or an entrepreneur in that business. So I've had to really learn about the other parts of building a business, but I think having the educational MBA background that I got in 2018, plus working and networking with a lot of successful entrepreneurs, I've been able to kind of tap into their experience to pull into what I'm trying to build here at Hire Tomorrow. And the business is still is small at the moment, but we're in the kind of a growth mode right now. And so, one of the skill sets of being a recruiter is I can go find people or skill sets, right? So if I know I need a good salesperson for my business or I need a good marketing consultant, I know how to go find them versus just Googling marketing consultants, right? So I think just the skill set of being able to find things and with with LinkedIn and all these other tools that you can go kind of virtually tap people on the shoulder and say, hey, here's what I'm looking for. Does this align with what you're trying to do? It's that skill set has made it a lot easier for me to kind of go build the ecosystem or the team that I'm really trying to look for.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're using those to build your own business as well as you're also helping other people to build their businesses.
That's right.
That's great. And you were talking about networking and things like that. How important is the human connection in your business in recruiting?
Well, I think my business is definitely very important. I think I don't know how much we want to get down the AI rabbit hole here, but with AI being really plugged into the recruiting process. So if you're a candidate looking for a job, you can hire an AI bot to apply to 1,000 jobs for you a day, right? And while as a candidate, that may sound really awesome because all you've got to do is hit the easy button and this bot will apply to jobs. And then on the business side, businesses are using AI to help sort those resumes. And so there's this like AI kind of tug of war of more candidates, better filters, et cetera, et cetera. And so what's also becoming interesting is candidates are using AI in an interview, right? So you can have AI loaded up on your laptop and it can be listening to the interviewer asking you questions and can provide you answers so that you can sound a lot smarter than what your actually background kind of warrants. So it's kind of this interesting thing where I feel like the more that AI and kind of content gets generated and AI gets kind of plugged into the world that I'm in, being in person and seeing people in real life is becoming more and more important. And so I've kind of invested over the last year really a lot more of my time and capital into going to in-person networking events because the types of clients that I'm going after in the private equity and the startup world, they're getting inundated with business development outreach and stuff that is just generated from AI. and they're not responding to messages, right? And now AI is starting to call people. I had an AI bot call me yesterday, and it was very, very clear it was an AI bot, not a human person. And so it's just this, there's this fascinating, we're in this kind of fascinating point with AI where we don't know if it's AI. AI is generating a lot of content, which is relatively okay. Some of it's good, some of it's terrible. And so the human element, being in person, shaking somebody's hand, seeing, having lunch. I had lunch yesterday with a couple of people, and it was just like so nice to get out and see people in person, even in a small setting. So I think it's becoming and will become more and more important, especially as people may not trust what they're seeing online because it can be just AI generated, and the AI content is becoming very, very good from a quality and like, I don't know if it's real or not perspective, which is a little scary, frankly.
Yeah, yeah. And I have not looked for a job for a long time, so that's very interesting. I'm not in the world of looking that you can easily apply to so many places now, and that's fascinating.
Well, it's fascinating, but also it's becoming an issue for small businesses because a lot of the clients that I work with are startups, small businesses where they don't have the internal capacity to sort through hundreds of resumes that they get. And also they don't have the time or experience to set up the internal systems, their applicant tracking systems, to be able to sort through a lot of the junk that gets brought in. I'm helping a very small company right now hire a director of sales, and we've received a few hundred applicants, and a lot are not the right fit, right? And so, I can't tell, I can't say that they're all bot led. They probably are more human led than bot led, but bigger companies are the ones that are getting hit the worst from a total applicant perspective. I've seen jobs that are posted for 48 hours and they get thousands of applicants. And unfortunately, if you are one of a few in that 1,000 or 2,000 applicant pool that's actually the right fit for the job, it's going to be very difficult for your resume to get sorted by AI and to be put in front of a recruiter to then schedule an interview. So again, we're in this kind of really interesting time, and I can't speak to all the other AI kind of products and industries out there, but what I'm seeing in my world is it's really interesting. I'm getting brought in to help clients sort through the mess because they don't have the time or capacity or experience to do it. And so it's actually making what I do a little bit more valuable and more needed, even though a lot of companies are kind of shifting away from hiring people to hiring bots. And I think that's or AI. I should call them agents. I shouldn't call them bots. It's a little
Right, right.
demeaning to the agent. Sorry, I apologize, agent.
Yeah,
So
yeah. What are other challenges in recruiting that startups and other businesses have?
well, I'll use a real life example. I won't name any names, but we're trying to hire a director of sales for an early stage company, and we're trying to fit three positions into one. And I've seen this throughout my career where you're building a business, you're growing a business, and you only have a finite amount of money that you can invest in hiring somebody. And so you try to cram everything that you need into one hire. And so that's the one of the bigger challenges that I see with startups and early stage companies is being able to really determine what are the key criteria that we're looking for in a person to fill a position, because we can't hire somebody that's great at accounting, great at sales, and great at marketing all in the same person. That person might exist, but there's maybe a handful of people. Which of those three things or three kind of areas that are really three different people, which ones are the most important? And then we can go find, the other ones as the business grows, or you can use fractional or consultants and things to kind of help move the ball down the field. So I think it's really kind of figuring out what you actually need in a position, and a good recruiter can help you do that because they can go kind of look at what you're looking for, know your business or your industry, and then help you kind of build that org structure. And then, that's really one of the biggest things is just kind of having that focus on, okay, I need to hire a salesperson, so let me go hire a good salesperson versus somebody that can also do accounting or HR or whatever. And then why I really focus a lot on small businesses and startups is they have a little bit of a brand issue because, if you're trying to hire for Dell, which is a big employer here in Austin, everybody knows who Dell is, right? And so they get a ton of applicants where you may be a really cool startup, but you're not able to spend the money to get your job in front of the necessary candidates. And so that's where a good recruiter can come in and tell your story and get those passive candidates that aren't actively looking up or actively applying to jobs to be interested in your business. So it's that balance of like, okay, how much do I spend on marketing? How much do I spend on branding? But then maybe working with a good recruiter that can go out and kind of generate that buzz and that interest from candidates, that could be a worthwhile investment as well.
Yeah. So, do you have any general advice for the job seeker out there?
Network, hiring bots or just kind of sitting down and applying to 100 jobs a day on your own is not necessarily the best way to do it. And I guess it really kind of depends on the level, I would say. But most of the people that I work with are kind of your kind of corporate employees, sales, marketing, accounting, and finance leaders, et cetera. Network. If you see a job that's posted on a company's website and you know somebody that works there, even if they're not in the same kind of part of the company that you want to get into, try to get your way in there because as a recruiter, in a big company or a small company, referrals are put to the top of the pile, regardless of if they're kind of on paper the right fit, quote unquote. So applying to jobs are important. Networking is important, even more important in my humble opinion. A super simple thing. I've been doing this for over 18 years, and it's very consistent. Is how it's almost not. It's almost like you shouldn't not have a professionally looking formatted resume because you can throw it into ChatGPT and say, please format this resume or check for grammar. I'm still seeing resumes that are just visually terrible, formatted terribly. I had another company that I was talking to, they decided to reject a qualified candidate because their resume was formatted incorrectly, had grammar errors, spelling errors, because that's your business card. That's your first entry point into a company. And if that's your first impression, even if you're a really good candidate, well, if you don't put enough effort into having a good resume, what's your work product going to look like once you get into the company and get comfortable? So, with AI and all these other, technology advances, it doesn't have to be the prettiest resume in the world, but just having it formatted correctly, bullet points instead of, consistent bullet points, consistent font sizes, like just the simple things. It's amazing that is still a lot of people just have a lot of errors. So that's a little bit of block and tackle, but now you really shouldn't have any excuses to not have a properly formatted resume at this point.
Yeah.
But more importantly, network, reach out to people to try to get you an introduction into that company that you're trying to go after is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we're talking about that you launched out on your own, but also a big part of what you do is you're an investor. What do you say to people? Maybe they just read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and now they want to get some more passive income. What are some options and ways to start and, to learn
Yeah,
about opportunities?
I would say don't trust what you see on LinkedIn or Instagram. Not everybody is as successful as they say. That's one. But I think if you're interested in learning about investing outside of just the stock market, or even if you're interested in investing in the stock market, is get as educated as you possibly can. You don't need to be an expert in everything, but so I started I spent about 2.5 years focused on multifamily real estate. So I feel very comfortable being able to have somebody send me a pitch deck on a multifamily asset and be able to, at a high level, be able to say, do I think it's worth me digging into or not? But I started working and investing in storage units. So I invested in a self-storage unit or property last year. And I was fully passive. I was brought the opportunity, but I talked to the kind of the group that brought me the deal. I needed to vet them. I got a referral from another investor that I trust, and they said, "Yep, I've invested with them before." And so I felt more comfortable, even though self-storage is a new asset class for me. I trusted the person that gave me the referral. I built trust with the investment company that brought me the opportunity, and they allowed me to come in at a lower kind of minimum than they were advertising, so that I could at least get my foot in the door, and then be able to, if that goes well, then I can increase my investment in the next deal. So I think if you're interested in getting involved in investing outside of the stock market, talk to experts, get referrals, because there's a lot of people that you probably know that are doing this or investing in real estate or, crypto or whatever you want to like become interested in. Talk to people that have been successful. I joined an angel investing group locally here in Austin for a few reasons, but one of them was just to be able to interact with people that were more successful than I am at my current moment. They've invested in a lot of different things. I got introduced to a couple investors here in Austin that I've invested with because of the relationship that I built in the angel investing group, because they were invested in a few of their funds for a few years and have seen success. And the last thing I'll say is, if you're talking to an investment firm that's bringing you a deal, don't just ask them about what their track record is on the good things that have happened, because we've gone through so many cycles in the last few years with like COVID and then interest rates going, way up and all of that. You want to know, have they lost any investor capital? Have they foreclosed on any properties? And how are they preventing or trying to mitigate risk now in this uncertain environment? So, and you really want to try to get in as low as possible in your initial investment, especially if it's a new company that you haven't had vetted through other people, because you're putting your money at risk. Real estate is an illiquid investment, meaning you can't just sell your stock tomorrow. There
Right.
are ways to do it in other ways, but and also it's like going to Vegas. Only invest as much money as you're willing to lose. So don't mortgage your house and go put that all on. You wouldn't mortgage your house and go put it all on black, right?
Right, right,
At the
right.
roulette table. So, but I've said a lot of maybe doom and gloom or whatever, but it's been a super powerful thing. If you read any books about the most wealthy people in the world and in history, they've owned real estate, and it's all cyclical. And so I think, things will kind of right the ship. But yeah, it's a lot of fun to learn new things about investing, and not just investing in the S&P 500, which hit an all-time high again today. So, there's a lot of other options out there. And also, last thing I'll say, apologize for being a little long-winded here, but the investing in real estate, whether it's a 300 unit apartment complex, is not only for the rich and famous. Like, you can get into it with a relatively small amount of investment, and that could help diversify your portfolio outside of just being probably very heavily weighted on the stock market with your 401k and any other investments. So it's not only for the rich and famous. Anybody can really get involved. You don't have to be an accredited investor in every deal. There are ones out there that you can get into as a quote unquote normal person. And that was a really big eye-opening thing for me when we first started. I was like, wouldn't it be cool to own that 300 unit apartment complex? Well, you can own a slice of that if it's being sold. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to kind of get into. And I could talk about real estate. I had a real estate podcast, so I could talk about it all day.
Very cool. Great advice. Justin, this has been a great conversation. Is there anything else you want to add today?
No, I would say, I mean, because my most of my career has been in recruiting. If you are an introvert and you're like, I hear what you're saying about networking, or I hear what you're saying about, trying to get a job, reach out, let me know. I'm happy to help. I've helped a lot of people get jobs, and I don't get paid for this stuff for a lot of it. And you know, being in recruiting, while I fell into it out of college, it has become a very strong passion of mine, because I can not only help companies grow with my talent of bringing in people, I can also help people get into jobs that they may not have thought they could get into. I've had a few people get 30, 40, 50% increases in their compensation just by changing jobs. And, while I don't get thank you cards for every person I place, it makes me feel good that, I've probably helped hire well over a couple thousand people in my career. And so if anybody needs any help or support, or help writing a better resume, if they can't figure out, plugging it into ChatGPT, just reach out. I'm happy to be a resource. I can, now that I've gotten 18 plus years experience, I can at least help kind of pass it on and give it to somebody else that's looking for a new job. So yeah, happy to help.
All right. And where do people find you to get your help or find out more about your business or your podcast?
Yeah, I would say easiest way is LinkedIn. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. So just drop me a note. My email address is just jdixon, Dixon at hiretomorrow.com. Shoot me an email, and, let me know how I can help, and would be happy to help or point you in the right direction, or would do whatever I can to, if you're looking for a job, help you find that.
All right. Thanks again, Justin.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you. I hope you take the time to explore other episodes and learn from other amazing guests. Remember, if you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there is now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the 4-letter Myers-Briggs code. I'll add a link in the show notes. And I'd love to connect with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com, or check out the quietandstrong.com website. which includes blog posts and links to social media for Quiet and Strong and much more. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. So many great things about being an introvert, and so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.